Social proof. In uncertainty, we copy what many others appear to do. When people face uncertainty, they often look to others for guidance. This isn't laziness. It's survival instinct. A dish feels safer if several nearby tables are eating it. And a joke seems funnier when the whole theater laughs. Psychologists call this shortcut social proof. If the group survives, their behavior must work. Most of the time, it's reliable. But the same force that reassures us can also mislead when the crowd is wrong. The digital world amplifies this effect. 5-star ratings, even if padded by friends or bots, persuade more effectively than a thoughtful review. People rarely dig into details. They scan averages, assuming the numbers capture reality. That's why apps and online stores keep ratings front and center. It's the modern version of joining the longest food stall line, trusting the crowd over personal judgment. Classic experiments reveal just how strong this pull is. In Solomon Ash's famous studies, participants agreed with obviously wrong answers about line lengths simply because everyone else did. The cost of standing out felt greater than the cost of being wrong. Social proof doesn't just shape behavior, it seeps into belief, which makes it even more unsettling. Marketers exploit this instinct constantly. Most popular choice tags, follower counts, and bestseller labels are engineered nudges. Bars install fake lines outside to signal desirability. Scarcity creates urgency, but social proof suggests safety. If others are waiting, there must be something worth joining. The influence extends well beyond buying habits. Silence in groups is often mistaken for agreement, leading to pluralistic ignorance, where everyone assumes others believe in an idea they privately doubt. This dynamic allows bad policies, toxic workplaces, or harmful norms to persist unchallenged. Sometimes the effects are surprisingly lighthearted. Take canned laughter. No one thinks it's real, but it still makes jokes seem funnier. Even fake signals of enjoyment tap into our instinct to join in, spreading emotion through suggestion. Of course, social proof isn't all bad. It helps people avoid constant trial and error. Crowded restaurants usually serve good food, and crossing with the group is safer than darting across alone. But awareness matters. 10,000 app downloads may reflect popularity, not quality, and long lines may hide poor judgment as easily as good taste. The trick is knowing when to trust the crowd and when to step back, because following lemmings feels safe right up until they reach the cliff. Scarcity effect. The rarer something feels, the more urgently we want it. Scarcity has a strange power. The fewer items there are, the more valuable they seem. A red tag screaming, "Only 2 left," can turn an ordinary product into something irresistible, as if those last boxes hold the secret to happiness. This instinct traces back to survival. When resources were scarce, hesitation could mean starvation. Today it means panic buying concert tickets. You weren't even sure you wanted the moment a site warns they're almost gone. Retailers exploit this flawlessly. On Black Friday, stacks of TVs vanish by mid-morning, not because they won't be restocked, but because the shrinking pile triggers a hunter-gatherer response. Airlines and travel sites use the same trick, flashing alerts like "only 3 seats left at this price." Suddenly, careful planners abandon reason for urgency, fearing the loss more than valuing the choice. Psychologists have long shown how scarcity warps judgment. In one experiment, people rated cookies from a nearly empty jar as tastier than identical ones from a full jar. Fewer cookies signaled exclusivity, so desire spiked. The same logic spills into social life. A delayed text feels more valuable than an instant reply, and people on dating apps seem more attractive when they appear hard to reach. Scarcity makes the ordinary feel rare. The danger is obvious. Scarcity can push people to chase things they don't really want. Closets are packed with unworn bargains, and unopened gadgets gather dust bought only because the deal was too good to miss. Desire comes first. Reason comes later. Of course, scarcity isn't always a trick. Sometimes the last loaf of bread or the final seat on a flight is genuinely worth grabbing fast. The challenge is knowing the difference. Before acting, ask, do I want this because it's valuable or just because it's almost gone? That pause can turn impulse into intention. After all, survival once depended on seizing what was scarce. Today, it's worth remembering there will always be another sale, another ticket, another TV. Authority bias, titles, expertise cues, and uniforms shortcut our judgment. Strangely, ordinary words sound more convincing when delivered from a podium or by someone in a lab coat. This is authority bias, the instinct to think. They look official, so they must be right. Instead of analyzing the message, the brain defers to titles, uniforms, and credentials, saving effort but leaving us open to persuasion by appearances. Classic experiments show how deep this runs. In the 1960s, Stanley Milgram's obedience studies revealed that participants would administer what they believed were painful electric shocks simply because a man in a lab coat told them to. The cloth wasn't magical, but it symbolized authority strongly enough to override doubt. The unsettling lesson: authority figures can push ordinary people into harmful actions. The same effect is everywhere in daily life. Ads often feature actors dressed as doctors, complete with stethoscopes and jargon, selling toothpaste or supplements. Financial analysts on TV are trusted because of titles, not because their predictions are accurate. Celebrities endorsing health products borrow authority they don't actually possess. Even in workplaces, ideas from managers are praised, while interns' contributions are overlooked. Not because the content differs, but because the source does. Sometimes, this bias plays out in almost comic ways. A clipboard-wielding stranger can easily convince people to answer surveys. Security guards command respect, even in empty hallways. Uniforms and props trigger compliance, often more than the actual situation. Yet authority bias isn't always harmful. Trusting genuine experts makes life manageable. We don't all have time to verify medical research before taking antibiotics. The danger comes when symbols of authority replace substance. Titles and appearances are easy to fake, and few people check them closely. Awareness is the best defense. Ask, is this person truly an expert, or just wearing the costume of one? Is the boss's idea solid, or simply amplified by the title? Authority bias once helped people survive by deferring to leaders in uncertain conditions. But today, the lab coat has been replaced by blue check marks and verified badges. Costumes can say, "Trust me," but only the content deserves belief. Intermittent reinforcement. Unpredictable rewards forge the stickiest habits. If rewards appeared every time we acted, behavior would be predictable and easy to abandon once the novelty faded. But scatter rewards unpredictably, and suddenly the behavior becomes sticky, hard to break. This is the power of intermittent reinforcement. Irregular rewards keep people hooked, far more than guaranteed ones. The brain acts like a hopeful gambler, convinced the next pull might be the jackpot. B.F. Skinner's mid-20th century pigeon experiments revealed this dynamic. Birds rewarded every time they pecked a lever quickly lost interest when food stopped. But pigeons fed on an unpredictable schedule, pecked compulsively, unable to stop. Swap pigeons for people, levers for phones, and food pellets for notifications, and the pattern looks uncomfortably familiar. Modern technology thrives on this. Social media drips likes, comments, and messages at random intervals, keeping users refreshing feeds for the next hit. Games exploit it with loot boxes, rare drops, and mystery rewards. Casinos perfected it long ago. Flashing lights, spinning wheels, Unpredictable payouts. What hooks players isn't certainty. It's the possibility that the next round will be the one. The same pattern appears in daily life. Texting thrives on it. An unexpected reply or emoji keeps people checking obsessively. Parents fall into it too, giving in to children's demands inconsistently, which ironically strengthens the behavior. Even vending machines that occasionally drop 2 snacks instead of 1 create stories that keep people pressing buttons. The humor is that most people know this trick and still fall for it. Everyone understands slot machines are designed to drain wallets, yet the occasional payout keeps players believing. People check email every few minutes, irrationally, because every so often something exciting appears. Randomness fuels persistence. Certainty would kill it. That unpredictability is also what makes habits so hard to break. Quitting a routine with predictable rewards means simply missing out. Quitting an intermittent one leaves the nagging thought, what if the best reward was just about to come? Awareness offers the only real defense. Recognizing when you're chasing unpredictability rather than genuine enjoyment can loosen its grip. Intermittent reinforcement may be psychology's stickiest glue, but naming it helps. Sometimes the real jackpot isn't in the machine or the feed. It's in deciding to walk away. Goal gradient. The nearer the finish line looks, the harder we push. Something curious happens. As we near the end of a task, effort spikes, energy resurfaces, and the finish line suddenly feels magnetic. This is the goal gradient effect. The tendency to accelerate behavior as a target comes into view. The distance from the first step to the last may be equal, but the final stretch feels faster, sweeter, and worth the sprint. Researchers first noticed this in the 1930s with rats in mazes. The closer they came to food, the faster they ran. Early steps were sluggish, but proximity triggered urgency. Humans respond the same way, only with coffee punch cards and loyalty apps instead of pellets. 9 stamps out of 10 makes that last cup irresistible, not because the coffee tastes better, but because completion does. Marketers lean heavily on this bias. Coffee shops hand out cards with 12 slots, but pre-stamp 2, so the journey looks shorter. Airlines and online retailers frame rewards around thresholds. No one celebrates earning 1% of points, but everyone brags about being just a few away from free perks. Nearness becomes its own motivator. Digital platforms amplify the pull. Fitness apps flaunt streaks that beg to be continued, punishing missed days with a reset counter. Video games use progress bars and experience points to trick the brain into seeing progress as achievement. Even small milestones make players grind harder for rewards that may be trivial. The same pattern shows up in everyday life. A student coasts for months, then surges with motivation in the final week. Marathon runners, exhausted for miles, find hidden energy as the finish approaches. Even scrubbing the last dishes can feel oddly triumphant. Nothing changed about the task itself. The brain just recategorized it as almost done. Sometimes this effect borders on absurd. People binge mediocre shows just to finish the season, or slog through long books they no longer enjoy because they're already 80% through. Completion itself feels like the prize, even when the prize is only closure. Harnessed wisely, the goal gradient effect can be powerful. Breaking large projects into milestones creates mini finish lines that sustain momentum. Celebrating small wins makes the climb less daunting, but left unchecked, it can lure us into chasing meaningless completions. Digital badges, streaks, or trophies with little value beyond the satisfaction of being done. The lesson is simple. Proximity reshapes effort. The final steps aren't easier, but they feel faster, and the pull of completion is hard to resist. Whether it's a rat in a maze, a runner on the last mile, or someone punch away from a free latte. Low ball, lock agreement early, reveal extra costs after commitment. The low ball technique is persuasion disguised as a bargain. The setup is simple. Secure agreement with an attractive offer, then reveal the hidden costs once commitment is made. By the time the extra terms appear, people are already invested, and walking away feels harder than accepting the surprise. The trick isn't in the deal itself. It's in the psychological glue formed by the initial yes. Car dealerships are masters of this move. A salesperson agrees to a great price, maybe even starts paperwork, only to return with unavoidable fees, a downgraded trade-in value, or a warranty slipped into the contract. By then, the buyer has pictured themselves behind the wheel. Backing out feels like losing time, energy, and even the identity of a soon-to-be car owner. Psychologists have shown the effect outside sales too. In one study, students were asked to participate in an experiment. Most agreed, only to learn afterward that it started at 7 a.m. Despite the inconvenience, the majority followed through because the initial yes had already been given. Commitment outweighed comfort. Modern marketing leans heavily on lowballing. Subscription services dangle first month for $1, only to slide users into full-priced plans later. Airlines lure customers with cheap base fares, then stack baggage fees, seat charges, and optional add-ons until the total swells. The same logic appears in everyday life. A friend asks, "Can you help Saturday?" And only after you agree, do you learn it means hauling boxes up 3 flights of stairs. The first yes creates a trap that makes refusal awkward. The humor is in how familiar it feels. Anyone who has tried to cancel a free trial or flown a budget airline knows the sting of realizing the deal shifted midway. The frustration isn't just the money, it's the sense of being locked in by your own earlier agreement. At its core, the low ball works because people crave consistency. Once committed, they don't want to admit they were wrong, so they rationalize the new terms as acceptable. The first yes becomes sticky, but awareness helps. Recognizing when conditions change gives you permission to reassess. Saying no isn't inconsistency, it's clarity. Walking away keeps both your wallet and your dignity intact. That's not all. Stack bonuses before refusal to create deal momentum. The "that's not all" technique works like a psychological infomercial. Just when you think the pitch is finished, more perks are added before you can say no. Instead of waiting for rejection, the persuader sweetens the deal preemptively, making it feel like refusing means walking away from multiple offers at once. The effect isn't about generosity, it's about momentum. Each new addition makes the package feel more urgent, more valuable, and harder to resist. Classic experiments showed its power with something as simple as cupcakes. In one version, sellers offered cupcakes for 75 cents. In another, they started at $1, but quickly added, "That's not all. Today it's 75 cents. A third framed the same price, with 2 bonus cookies. The result? Sales jumped. The extras didn't change the math, but they changed perception, transforming a plain offer into a bargain. Infomercials of the 1990s turned this into performance art. But wait, "that's not all" became a cultural slogan, shouted between demonstrations of knives that cut through steel and tomatoes alike. Just as viewers considered flipping the channel, the host stacked on another free bonus, a second set of knives, a storage case, a lifetime guarantee. The pitch wasn't about the knife. It was about the avalanche of value. Modern marketing uses the same play with slicker packaging. Online stores add free shipping or bonus points for immediate purchase. Subscriptions extend free trials or throw in premium upgrades. Apps promise 3 bonus features plus no ads if you download now. The psychology is the same. Frame the core offer as a bundle too good to pass up. The technique even shows up in personal life. A friend asking for moving help might add, "I'll buy you lunch, and you can keep that spare lamp I don't need." Teachers soften assignments by adding concessions like extra days or freedom to choose a topic. The main request hasn't changed, but the extras grease acceptance. Humor lies in how transparent the tactic can be. and how often it still works. People rolled their eyes at infomercial scripts, yet stayed glued to the screen at 2 a.m. Even when a friend piles on too many sweeteners, I'll drive, pay for gas, bring snacks, even make the playlist. It's obvious they're overselling, and yet the oversell often succeeds. Psychology runs on reciprocity. When someone keeps offering before you've refused, turning them down feels stingy, as though you're rejecting kindness rather than a sales pitch. That's why the tactic is so effective. It disguises persuasion as generosity. The defense is awareness. When faced with a stacked offer, ask, would I still want this without the extras? If the answer is no, then the bundle is just padding. The "that's not all" technique dazzles in the moment, but clarity comes from stripping the add-ons away. Because sometimes, all that's being sold is the same old cupcake with shinier wrapping. Disrupt and reframe. Brief confusion, followed by a simple bargain frame. Sometimes the quickest path to persuasion isn't direct. It's through a small jolt of confusion, followed by a clear, comforting explanation. This is the essence of the disrupt and reframe technique. First, break someone's autopilot with something odd or unexpected. Then reframe the request in simple, positive terms. The disruption grabs attention. The reframing steers it toward agreement. Psychologists demonstrated this with fundraising pitches. Instead of saying, "We're selling greeting cards for $3, they tried, "We're selling them for 300 pennies. That's $3. It's a bargain." The strange phrasing forced people to pause, just long enough for the bargain frame to land. Sales jumped. Compared to the straightforward version, nothing changed about the offer, only how it was delivered. Marketers use the same strategy. Ads play with odd phrasing. Buy one, get 2 halves free, or pay what you want, even a penny, before reframing the deal as generous or clever. Even playful packaging, like "zero cows harmed in making this oat milk," disrupts expectations, then reframes the product as ethical and witty. The oddness catches attention. The reframe seals the impression. Everyday conversations hold smaller versions. A friend might say, "Lend me 5,000 seconds of your time." "Oh, that's just a couple of hours." Parents do it too. "This chore will take less time than one scroll through TikTok." The disruption resets the frame, making the request feel lighter. Humor often amplifies the effect. Imagine someone at a bake sale shouting, "Cupcakes for the low, low price of 37 nickels. The crowd laughs, then nods when it's reframed as just under $2. In meetings, a coworker might break tension by joking, "Let's schedule this for 2075, before proposing a reasonable deadline that suddenly feels easy to accept. The absurdity clears mental space, and the reframe fills it. The psychology works in 2 steps. First, disruption interrupts automatic resistance. People can't reflexively decline because they're momentarily puzzled. Then reframing supplies a quick positive lens that guides them to yes. It's persuasion by derailment and redirection. Catch the mind off guard, then hand it a ready-made conclusion. Awareness is the safeguard. Not every odd phrasing deserves compliance. Asking, "Would I still agree if this were explained plainly?" strips away the trick. If the answer is no, the disruption was just smoke and mirrors. The disrupt then reframe effect thrives because humans run much of life on autopilot. A small surprise breaks the script, and the reframe nudges decisions in a new direction. Used responsibly, it makes communication more engaging, even fun. Used manipulatively, it sneaks past defenses. Either way, it shows how a moment of confusion, quickly resolved, can be one of persuasion's sharpest tools. Even a penny helps. Shrinking the ask lowers resistance, increases yeses. When asked for money or effort, individuals often calculate the cost first. Mental calculation can weigh generosity. If the request is so little, it seems silly. Even a penny helps. The barriers to answering yes diminish drastically. The paradox is that lowering the minimum increases compliance, and overall contributions, considerably beyond the modest floor. It works because the mind says, I can't refuse that. David Penn and Robert Cialdini performed fundraising efforts to test this. The statement, even a penny will help, increased donation rates compared to the normal pitch. The language made the request less daunting, yet few gave a dime. People who might have declined instead donated, often more than the minimum. The strategy is excellent at lowering the psychological barrier to admission, not securing pennies. This strategy is used by charities. Online donation buttons occasionally offer, give $1 today, alongside bigger sums. The lowest alternative is rarely chosen, but its presence lowers opposition, making $10 or $20 seem fair. Public radio pledge drives emphasize every little bit counts, making contributing easy. After crossing a small threshold, the audience no longer feels obligated and frequently becomes generous. Subscription services and marketers adopt the idea. A streaming platform may offer, join for just $1 your first month, suggesting easy entrance. The corporation doesn't anticipate to earn from that dollar. It expects customers to stay and pay full price later. The small initial request seems insignificant, but the long-term payoff is not. Personal, even a penny scam occurs when people soften favors. A coworker may ask, could you help me for just a minute, knowing it will take longer? A friend may say, it's just a small favor, to avoid the reflexive no. Wording disarms, and once the yes escapes, scope typically widens. The initial phrasing made people feel like helpful people, therefore they rarely complain. Too much transparency makes this technique funny. Imagine someone asking, could you lend me even just a drop of gas for my car? Before implying they require a full tank. Some fundraisers joke, even a nickel helps. Though if you have a credit card handy, we won't complain. Everyone knows the rhetorical dance. But the impossibly little ask softens the route to a realistic gift. Persuasion includes laughter. This psychology involves self-image. Denying a little request feels harsh. Denying a huge one is sensible. Nobody wants to turn down a dime. Once compliance is achieved, identity takes over. I give. After taking that role, people often give more than they expected to stay consistent. Awareness doesn't erase the effect, but it provides context. If a request is made in microscopic terms, ask yourself, what am I agreeing to? If the contribution feels wonderful, regardless of size, the decreased barrier is kind. If not, the penny pitch is a clever hook. Either way, the strategy shows how generosity often comes from how the ask is presented, not wallet size. Compromise effect. The middle option feels safest among extremes. When given three options, cheap and basic, expensive and deluxe, and in the middle, most people choose the middle. Despite not being the ideal fit, it feels safe, balanced, and sensible. The compromise effect. Humans favor the middle ground as the reasonable choice to avoid stinginess and luxury. Marketers use this peculiarity often. A coffee shop may sell small, big, and a huge bucket. Most clients choose large because it's between modest and extravagant, not because it's perfect. Electronic stores also sell cheap, Ultra HD, and mid-range TVs. Shopping in the middle makes shoppers feel smart for avoiding extremes. Ironically, the center is typically designed to be the company's most profitable product, bookended by the other two. Social life reflects this. Friends choosing supper may choose a mid-priced bistro above the cheap diner and the high-end steakhouse. Couples looking for furniture avoid bargain basement and luxury boutiques, preferring the middle ground. Politics sometimes favor compromise politicians because they are between perceived extremes, not because of their beliefs. Predictability of the middle choice adds humor. At a ridiculously enormous mega coffee size, and large feels modest. Comparing a $400 wine to a $60 bottle makes $60 seem restrained. People chuckle at themselves for falling for it, yet order the middle as the smart choice. The compromise effect works because individuals loathe regret. Middle feels like insurance against making the wrong extreme choice. However, awareness shows that middle isn't always better, just framed. Reference price illusion. High regular price flatters contemporary prices. Imagine a sweatshirt marked originally $199, now $79. Although $79 is expensive, the reduced original price makes it seem affordable. The reference price illusion occurs when the brain assigns value to the first number, even if it is inflated or arbitrary. The so-called discount looks generous compared to the high reference, fooling buyers into thinking they saved. Department stores thrive on this illusion. Nearly everything is on sale, and few pay original prices. Online shops display 70% off banners without explaining that the figure was fictitious. Customers leave satisfied, thinking they outsmarted the system, although they did not. Reference prices change perception and bodily sensation, according to psychology. Wine tastes better when declared costly. The lowered price feels like a prize, and the regular price becomes a quality standard. Even when shoppers anticipate deception, the illusion works because comparisons, not absolutes, determine value. Humor from daily life appears. People brag about saving $200 on a jacket, but forget they spent $150. They boast about a gadget deal, even though the original price was fabricated. The exhilaration of beating the inflated number overshadows the fair price. It helps to know the important concern is whether the present pricing makes sense on its own, not how much lower it is than the reference. Otherwise, the discount is a numerical illusion. Charm pricing. 0.99 endings, signal deal, and feel cheaper. Why do most prices finish in .99 instead of round numbers, even if the difference is a penny? $19.99 feels cheaper than $20. Charm pricing encourages people to focus on the leftmost digit, making the figure seem like the teens rather than the 20s. The brain processes the first digit more, thus $19.99 sounds like $19 rather than $20. Retailers like this subtle yet dramatic effect. A pair of $49.99 shoes feels mid-range, but $50 ones are a psychological leap. Even restaurants post $9.99 instead of $10 to suggest affordability, even if no one is saving. Online merchants compound the tactic by spreading attractive prices across every page until buyers see the deals. Charm pricing affects quality and cost perception according to research. Items ending in .99 are frequently considered cheap, while those ending in .00 or .50 are premium. The format's emotional cues matter more than the pence. People occasionally cling to illusions, which is funny. Shoppers happily say, "It was under 20, ignoring the $19.99 price. Parents may tell youngsters the toy was only $9 when it actually $9.99, using the same psychological distortion businesses do. Despite everyone knowing the joke, the deception continues. The brain is a storyteller, not a mathematician. Thus charm pricing works. That penny under a round number shows thrift and deal hunting, even if the savings barely cover pocket lint. Pausing to mentally round up and remembering that $19.99 is $20 is the best protection. Drip pricing. Reveal costs gradually as commitment grows. Few things test human patience, like watching a price creep upward, bit by bit, until it barely resembles the number you started with. That's drip pricing in action. The strategy of revealing costs slowly, in stages, after the buyer has already invested time and attention. Instead of confronting the full total up front, companies feed out extra charges like breadcrumbs, ensuring people follow the trail deeper into commitment before realizing how much they're really paying. Airline tickets are the poster child. A flight that looks like a steal at $99 soon sprouts hidden charges, luggage fees, seat selection fees, boarding fees, maybe even a convenience fee for paying online, as though anyone buys tickets at the counter anymore. Each step in the booking process drips another charge onto the total, and by the time the traveler reaches checkout, the bargain fare has doubled. Yet most buyers complete the purchase anyway, having already sunk time into choosing dates and entering details. Backing out feels like too much work. Hotels use the same tactic with resort fees, which magically appear after the room has been selected. A guest books a $150 room, only to discover at checkout that Wi-Fi, pool access, and towel service are bundled into a mysterious $35 daily surcharge. Car rental companies drip on insurance and fuel fees, while concert ticket platforms add processing fees only at the very last click. Each individual add-on seems tolerable, but the total builds quietly, like a faucet that never stops leaking. The psychology behind drip pricing is partly inertia and partly the sunk cost effect. Once people have invested effort in a purchase, they're reluctant to abandon it, even if the costs swell beyond expectation. Companies know this and strategically delay the pain points. The gradual reveal dulls resistance, making the full price easier to swallow than if it had been presented in one painful gulp. Humor slips in because everyone recognizes the absurdity. Shoppers joke about booking a cheap flight and then paying extra to breathe air in the cabin. Or they laugh at concert tickets, advertised for $50, that end up costing $82.75 after mystery fees, wondering if the extra $32 is going toward a velvet seat cushion. People grumble, but they still buy, proving that the drip doesn't just annoy, it works. Online platforms and subscription services love the tactic too. A streaming service might lure customers with a base plan that seems affordable, then drip on charges for HD quality, extra screens, or ad-free viewing. A gym might advertise a low monthly fee, then tack on annual maintenance charges once members are locked in. Even delivery apps use it, layering on service fees, small order fees, delivery fees, and optional tips that hardly feel optional once the order is assembled. Drip pricing isn't always sinister. Sometimes it reflects genuine modular pricing. Customers might appreciate seeing the breakdown, choosing only what they want. The problem comes when essential services, like oxygen on a plane, practically are disguised as add-ons, making the headline price more illusion than reality. Regulators in some countries have started cracking down, demanding all-in pricing to stop the drip. Awareness is the best counter. Shoppers who remind themselves to calculate the full total before committing can resist the pull. Asking, "What will this really cost me at checkout?" is the equivalent of turning off the leaky faucet before the drip floods the kitchen. In the end, drip pricing thrives because people prefer optimism at the start of a purchase. The low entry number hooks them, and by the time the extras appear, they're too invested to walk away. It's not just pricing, it's psychology, cleverly weaponized one fee at a time. Urgency cues, countdowns, and only two left amplify fear of missing out. Humans are not particularly graceful when the clock starts ticking. Add a flashing timer, a dwindling inventory message, or the phrase "last chance," and suddenly rational thought packs its bags and flees. This is the psychology of urgency cues, signals designed to make people feel time or supply is about to run out, pushing them to act now rather than later. It's persuasion by panic, a way to swap careful consideration for impulsive grabbing. E-commerce sites have perfected this tactic. Picture browsing for shoes online and seeing the dreaded red text, "Only 2 left in your size." Even if you weren't sure about the shoes, suddenly your cursor hovers over "Add to cart." Scarcity already makes things desirable, but tie it to a ticking clock, and desire becomes urgency. Limited time flash sales, countdown banners, and deal of the day Pop-ups are all crafted to make hesitation feel like loss. Whether the countdown resets tomorrow is irrelevant. The clock feels real in the moment. Travel sites are masters of this theater. Hotel booking platforms warn, 5 people are looking at this room right now, or only 1 room left at this price. Airlines sprinkle in similar nudges. Prices are rising. Book in the next 10 minutes. The accuracy of these statements is often debatable, but the effect is consistent. The message is not "this is a good deal." It's "if you don't act now, someone else will snatch it away." The fear of missing out hijacks logic, turning browsers into buyers. Psychological studies explain why urgency works so well. Loss aversion makes people more sensitive to missing opportunities than to gaining them. Combine that with the goal gradient effect. Effort increases near the finish line, and urgency cues create a perception that the finish line is vanishing. The brain interprets delay as danger, pushing people to secure the prize immediately. It's the same reason clearance bins in stores attract hands like magnets. Nobody wants to be the one who waited too long. Social life offers its own urgency cues. Friends inviting you to an event might casually say, "Spots are filling up fast," whether or not they are. A date who says, "This weekend's my only free time," suddenly makes themselves seem more valuable. Even parents use urgency, instinctively. Last chance before bedtime is less about the clock and more about making action feel urgent. These cues shrink hesitation windows, nudging decisions toward yes. Humor appears in how transparent the cues can be while still working. Shoppers laugh when they see an online timer reset the next day, yet they still rush to click buy when it's counting down. Or consider the furniture store, perpetually advertising its final days sale. For the past decade, everyone knows the final days never end. But the urgency banner still makes wallets twitch. People joke about it, then walk out with a new sofa. The truth is that urgency works not because people believe the message fully, but because it feels safer to act than to risk regret. Better to grab the shoes, the ticket, or the gadget now than spend the evening replaying the words, "Only one left." Even when they suspect the manipulation, the discomfort of inaction is worse than the pain of a possibly impulsive purchase. Awareness can slow the rush. Pausing to ask, "If this were available tomorrow, would I still want it?" helps separate genuine desire from panic-fueled compliance. Real urgency does exist. Sometimes seats, rooms, or opportunities truly are limited. But when urgency is just theater, the pause restores control. Because while countdown timers tick loudly, time rarely runs out as quickly as the bright red font insists. Mere exposure. Repeated contact breeds liking and trust. Sometimes, simply seeing something again and again is enough to make it feel familiar, comfortable, even likable. This is the mere exposure effect, the psychological phenomenon where repeated contact with a stimulus increases positive feelings toward it. Whether it's a song, a face, a logo, or even a shape, the object doesn't have to be objectively good. It just has to keep showing up until the brain starts nodding along, muttering, "Yeah, I kind of like this now." Psychologist Robert Zajonc famously demonstrated this. In the 1960s, with nonsense words and random shapes, participants who were exposed to them repeatedly rated them more positively than those they saw only once. The more often the items appeared, the more likable they became. No new information was added. The familiarity itself created comfort. The human brain is wired to equate known with safe, which in evolutionary terms makes sense. If a plant or an animal kept appearing without causing harm, it was probably safe to approach. Marketers thrive on this principle. Brand logos plastered on billboards, repeated ad jingles on the radio, or commercials that seem to air every 5 minutes aren't just about information, they're about exposure. A consumer doesn't have to engage deeply with the message. Just seeing the brand, often enough, plants it in memory and makes it feel trustworthy. That's why companies spend billions on advertising that seems repetitive to the point of irritation. Familiarity isn't about excitement. It's about building comfort through persistence. Music and pop culture ride the same wave. A song heard once might sound bland, but after repeated radio play, it worms its way into memory and suddenly feels catchy. Movies or shows gain affection simply by becoming part of the background chatter. The mere exposure effect explains why people sometimes end up liking celebrities or influencers they initially found irritating. The repeated presence on screen slowly builds familiarity until irritation softens into acceptance. Everyday social interactions reflect it too. Someone who sees the same coworker in the break room every morning may begin to feel friendlier toward them, even without long conversations. Neighbors who exchange casual waves over months start to seem more trustworthy. Even strangers on a daily commute can become familiar faces, building a quiet sense of connection without a single word spoken. Humor sneaks in when people realize how silly this can be. Everyone has had the experience of hating a commercial jingle at first, only to catch themselves humming it later, or rolling their eyes at a reality show star, only to eventually say, "Hey, they're not so bad." Mere exposure is why people sometimes find comfort in the ugliest sweater they own. After seeing it in the mirror enough times, it starts to feel like part of their identity. The mechanism is tied to processing fluency. Familiar things are easier to process, and the brain interprets that ease as positivity. New and unfamiliar stimuli require more effort, so they feel riskier. With enough repetition, the effort fades, and what once felt strange now feels safe. The effect is so powerful that it can even override negative impressions. Disliked stimuli can grow tolerable, or even liked, through sheer repetition. Awareness of the mere exposure effect allows people to question whether their preferences are genuine or just the byproduct of repetition. Do you really like that pop song? Or did hearing it 20 times trick your brain into comfort? Is that brand trustworthy because of its quality, or because its logo is everywhere? The answer may not always matter. Familiarity can be valuable, but recognizing the bias restores choice. At its heart, mere exposure shows that liking often has less to do with substance and more to do with presence. Sometimes all it takes to turn something from strange to beloved is for it to keep showing up until resistance fades. Zeigarnik effect. Unfinished tasks stay top of mind. The human brain has a funny way of bookmarking things it hasn't finished. A completed task tends to fade neatly into memory, but an unfinished one lingers, buzzing in the background like a phone that won't stop vibrating. This is the Zeigarnik effect, named after psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, who noticed in the 1920s that waiters remembered unpaid orders with striking clarity, but quickly forgot the details once the bills were settled. The incomplete state created mental tension that only resolved with closure. Everyday life is riddled with this phenomenon. That half-written email nags at you more than the dozen already sent. The book left unfinished on the nightstand calls louder than the stack you've completed. Cliffhanger TV episodes weaponize the effect shamelessly, cutting to black just as the hero is dangling off a ledge. Or worse, right after someone ominously says, "I know your secret." The brain itches for resolution, and streaming platforms happily oblige with autoplay, keeping people glued far past bedtime. Marketers and media creators love the Zeigarnik effect because it keeps audiences hooked. Think of To Be Continued at the end of serial dramas, or the endless loop of TikTok videos that cut off mid-story. You won't believe what happened next. The tension of incompletion drives clicks, views, and engagement. Even email subject lines exploit it. Your free gift is waiting, dangling a task that feels incomplete until opened. The cycle is simple. Unfinished equals unforgettable. The effect also explains why people make to-do lists. Writing down incomplete tasks reduces some of the mental tension, a phenomenon called the offloading effect. Without lists, uncompleted chores rattle around in working memory, demanding attention at inconvenient moments. That's why you suddenly remember to buy milk right before bed, but forget again at the grocery store. The unfinished status keeps surfacing until resolved. Social life is no different. A conversation interrupted mid-story lingers in the listener's mind more than a fully told anecdote. A text left unread gnaws at people longer than a completed exchange. Even romantic relationships sometimes echo with the Zeigarnik effect. Unfinished business can haunt people far more than tidy endings, leaving what-if questions that replay long after the chapter should have closed. Humor finds its way here, too. Everyone knows the irritation of leaving a puzzle with one missing piece, or a video game saved right before the final boss. People laugh at themselves for being unable to relax until they've finished tasks as trivial as matching socks. And few things torment the modern mind like a notification bubble hovering with one unread message. It's a digital embodiment of the Zeigarnik effect. One small thing undone, impossible to ignore. Psychologically, the mechanism stems from cognitive tension. Unfinished tasks occupy more mental space because the brain keeps them active, ready to complete. Completion releases that tension, freeing attention for other things. In evolutionary terms, this probably helped humans remember to finish important survival tasks, gather food, finish shelter, close the cave entrance, before relaxing. Today it mostly keeps people from enjoying dinner, while their inbox remains open. Awareness of the Zeigarnik effect can be empowering. Breaking large tasks into smaller, finishable steps provides moments of closure, reducing mental drag. Writing things down frees the mind from carrying them around, and recognizing when unfinished tasks are being exploited, like cliffhangers engineered to trap you into just one more episode, helps reclaim control over time and attention. In the end, the Zeigarnik effect shows that completion is more than accomplishment. It's psychological relief. Until the circle closes, the brain keeps the loop open, nudging and prodding. That's why check marks feel so satisfying, why endings matter, and why even the tiniest loose ends can feel louder than the most glorious finish. Reciprocity norm. Favors spark invisible debts that press for repayment. Human relationships rest on an unspoken rule. If you do something for me, I'll return the favor, though usually not by scratching your back, unless you've got an unreachable itch. This reciprocity norm is the invisible glue that keeps societies functioning. A small gesture, like a free mint with your restaurant bill, or a friend holding the elevator, triggers a subtle sense of obligation. It doesn't matter how minor the act. The pull to reciprocate is powerful. Marketers understand this well. A free sample at the grocery store isn't just generosity, it's strategy. Your brain nudges. You can't just walk away. Buy the cheese. Historically, failing to return favors could mean social exclusion, which once carried real survival risks. Even today, the instinct lingers. A car dealer who throws in floor mats, or a charity handing out a cheap pen, isn't being random. They're priming you to give more than you planned. Psychology experiments confirm this. In one classic study, people who received a free soda from a stranger were far more likely to buy raffle tickets from him later, regardless of whether they actually liked him. Reciprocity often overrides personal feelings, creating moments where you wonder why you said yes when you wanted to say no. Of course, this rule doesn't only apply to sales or donations. A colleague remembering your coffee order can spark genuine warmth, and the thought, "I'll return the kindness." But reciprocity can be exploited too. Manipulative partners, influencers, and political campaigns often use gifts or freebies to manufacture loyalty. The line between genuine generosity and subtle coercion can be thin. Still, reciprocity isn't inherently bad. Collaboration, friendships, and everyday kindness rely on it. The key is awareness. When you feel that inner voice whisper, "You owe them," pause and ask, "Is this a fair exchange or a calculated push?" Even when you recognize the tactic, the pull remains strong. Who hasn't lingered at a booth after accepting a free cookie? The best defense is awareness. Know when to give back, and when a smile, a thank you, and walking away with the mint is enough. Commitment and consistency. Once declared, choices steer future behavior. When someone says yes, even to something small, their mind shifts to stay consistent with that choice. People dislike seeing themselves as dishonest. So the drive for commitment and consistency isn't purely logical. It's about protecting self-image. Once a promise is made, especially in public, it becomes a reflection of identity. A person who casually tells friends they'll start working out may not enjoy the gym, but they'll go anyway to avoid being seen as unreliable. Marketers and organizers know this well. Political canvassers often begin with harmless requests, signing a petition, or putting up a bumper sticker. These tiny acts plant a seed. I'm the kind of person who supports this cause. Later, refusing a bigger request feels like betraying that identity. A small yes grows into larger commitments, donations, volunteer hours, even phone banking. What starts as a snowball rolls into an avalanche of obligation. Classic studies reveal how powerful this effect can be. In one, homeowners who first agreed to display a small window sign promoting safe driving were far more likely later to allow a massive, unattractive billboard in their yard. Without that initial step, the leap would have seemed absurd. Once people adopt a belief as part of their public image, they'll go to great lengths to stay consistent. Businesses use the same principle with free trials and credit card required memberships. Clicking "I agree" isn't just legal. It's a psychological commitment. Canceling later feels like undoing a decision, and the brain resists backtracking. That's why people keep paying for subscriptions they rarely use. In some cases, that commitment outlasts the habit itself. Consistency becomes even stronger in social settings. Public promises feel binding. Announcing goals online or voicing support in a meeting creates the illusion of accountability, even when no one is paying close attention. Changing course then feels embarrassing, so people double down, sometimes supporting ideas they no longer believe in. The pull extends beyond behavior to beliefs themselves. Psychologists have found that after making a purchase, people often convince themselves they like the brand more than they actually did at first. The logic is circular. I bought it, so I must have had a reason. Actions shape attitudes, and attitudes reinforce actions, locking self-image into place. Yet consistency isn't inherently negative. It can fuel discipline, helping people stick to exercise routines, writing goals, or study plans. Accountability partners, progress trackers, and public commitments all work because the memory of a past promise nudges behavior forward. The key is awareness. Small commitments can be the first step to meaningful growth or to manipulation. Recognizing the pattern doesn't erase its pull, but it gives you the choice: follow through or stop before the harmless yes snowballs into the billboard on your lawn. Loss aversion. Potential losses hurt more than equal gains. Delight. Finding $20 on the street might brighten your day, but losing the same amount can ruin it. That imbalance, where losses sting more than equivalent gains, please us, is called loss aversion. Behavioral economists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky demonstrated through prospect theory that people would rather avoid losing than take an equal chance to win. The math often makes sense, but the emotional weight of loss tips the scales. Marketers and negotiators use this instinct constantly. Save $50 by switching. Sounds appealing, but you're losing $50 every month by staying is unbearable. Gyms keep members motivated with lines like "Don't lose your progress," and subscription services rely on free trials, because giving something up feels worse than never having it. Once people get a taste, canceling feels like loss. This bias seeps into daily life. Investors hold failing stocks to avoid realizing a loss. Students stay in majors they dislike, unwilling to abandon years already spent. People remain in relationships long past their expiration, fearing wasted effort more than future unhappiness. Loss aversion keeps them stuck. Games and casinos exploit the same psychology. Players hate losing progress or narrowly missing a jackpot more than they love winning. That sense of loss drives them to keep playing, chasing restoration. Even small defeats stand out. Someone might ignore a $5 monthly app charge, but fume over a $5 parking ticket. Both are losses, but one feels sharper. Still, loss aversion isn't all bad. It can be reframed as motivation. Don't lose the progress you've made. Can be more powerful than keep going. Awareness helps too. Losing a little money is annoying, but it doesn't need to ruin your day. Ultimately, loss aversion isn't about money. It's about ownership. Giving up something we already hold feels painful, even if rationally it shouldn't. The key is learning to distinguish between a true warning, like not wasting food or missing a real opportunity, and the brain's overreaction to losing $20. Anchoring. First numbers set the yardstick for every comparison after. The first number you see can quietly shape every judgment that follows, even when reason tells you it shouldn't matter. The brain latches onto that number as an anchor. A car listed at $40,000 suddenly feels like a bargain at $35,000, even if its real value is closer to $25,000. Every other figure is judged against that starting point. Classic experiments prove how powerful this bias is. In one famous study, participants spun a rigged wheel of fortune before estimating how many United Nations countries were in Africa. Those who landed on high numbers guessed higher. Those who spun low guessed lower. The spin was meaningless, but it anchored their thinking. Advertisers exploit this constantly. A jacket reduced from $300 to $149 feels like a steal, even if it's worth only $100. Restaurants place an overpriced steak at the top of the menu so that mid-range dishes look cheap by comparison. We remember the inflated number more than the fair one. Anchors shape judgments outside of money too. First impressions matter because labels stick. If someone is introduced as brilliant, flaws are overlooked. If they're branded lazy, every action is colored by that assumption. Anchors also dominate negotiations. The first offer sets the tone. A $75,000 salary feels acceptable against an $80,000 anchor, but it would feel disappointing if the opening number had been lower. Skilled negotiators know to set anchors early or reframe those of their opponents. The bias creeps into everyday quirks. A person who insists on 8 hours of sleep will complain about exhaustion after 6, while others consider 6 normal. Old memories of gas prices under $1 make today's prices seem outrageous, even if inflation explains the difference. Once set, anchors drag perceptions with them. Because anchoring is automatic, it's nearly impossible to avoid. People believe they're being objective when they're not. The best defense is to ask, compared to what? Is this deal genuinely good, or just better than the inflated number I was shown first? Anchors will always tug at judgments, but questioning them weakens their grip. Framing effect. 90% success sounds safer than 10% failure. Same math. How information is framed often matters more than the information itself. That's the essence of the framing effect. Identical facts trigger different reactions depending on whether they're cast in a positive or negative light. A treatment with a 90% survival rate feels reassuring, but the same treatment described as a 10% mortality rate suddenly feels risky. The numbers don't change, but perception does. Marketers and politicians thrive on this principle. Yogurt, labeled 90% fat-free, outsells the identical tub labeled 10% fat. A contribution sounds more patriotic than a tax. Words act like spotlights, emphasizing one angle while hiding another, shaping judgment without altering reality. Psychologists have demonstrated how framing steers decisions. In one famous study, participants chose between 2 medical treatments during a hypothetical outbreak. When results were described as lives saved, people leaned toward the safer option. When framed as lives lost, the majority switched to riskier choices. Same math, different story. Proof that risk tolerance bends to presentation. Framing also reshapes fairness and morality. Calling unemployment 90% employment feels hopeful. 10% jobless sounds dire. Government support described as assistance feels humane, while a handout feels demeaning. Even in daily life, the description matters. Quiet and thoughtful paints a kinder picture than not outgoing. Though both describe the same trait, businesses use framing to soften bad news. A phone plan isn't sold as $1,200 a year, but just $99 a month. Airlines say upgrade for only $20 more. Instead of your ticket lacks basic comforts. Customers often see through the trick, yet still respond. It's like knowing the magician's sleight of hand while still gasping at the reveal. Sometimes framing is unintentionally funny. Pre-owned vehicle feels more dignified than used car, as if the previous owner simply admired it in a garage. Fee adjustment sounds neutral compared to price hike, even though both mean you're paying more. Language smooths rough edges, making reality easier to swallow. Awareness won't make you immune, but it gives you perspective. Flipping the frame, asking, "What's the same fact?" phrased the other way, reveals whether the decision stands on truth or spin. Recognizing the wrapping helps resist snap judgments, whether it's panic at a 10% risk or excitement at a 90% chance. The facts remain steady, but without questioning the frame, you risk buying into yogurt, policies, or promises that only look good because of the label. Foot in the door. Agree to a tiny ask first. The big ask feels natural later. The easiest way to secure agreement on something big isn't to start with the big request. It's to begin small. This is the essence of the foot in the door technique. Get a minor yes first, then build toward a larger one. That small commitment shifts self-perception. I must be the kind of person who helps with this, making the bigger ask feel less like a leap and more like a natural continuation. Psychologists Jonathan Friedman and Scott Fraser demonstrated this in the 1960s. Homeowners were first asked to place a tiny support safe driving sign in their windows. Weeks later, the same group was asked to display a massive, unattractive billboard on their lawns. Those who had agreed to the small sign were far more likely to accept the billboard. The message hadn't changed. Only the pathway to compliance had. Modern life is full of these maneuvers. Charities start with petitions or surveys before asking for donations. Salespeople open with, "Could I have just a minute of your time?" A minute that stretches into a full pitch. Streaming services hand out free trials. Knowing the effort of signing up makes people more likely to stay subscribed. What looks like a small crack in the door soon becomes an open invitation. Social life works the same way. A friend asks to borrow a pen, then later asks for help moving furniture. On dating apps, a simple icebreaker leads to deeper requests, like meeting in person. The strategy doesn't feel manipulative because it's gradual, as though one step naturally leads to the next. Often, people notice the pattern only in hindsight. Someone agrees to watch a pet for a weekend, then somehow ends up watering plants, collecting mail, and driving to the airport. Each yes felt consistent with the last, until the small favor snowballed into much more. That's the foot firmly wedged in the doorway. But the technique isn't inherently manipulative. It can be constructive. Habits, goals, and skills often grow from small commitments. A person who wants to run might begin with putting on sneakers, then walking a block, then jogging miles. Teachers and coaches use this principle to build progress step by step, turning daunting leaps into manageable climbs. The lesson is that compliance grows gradually, like vines. Awareness doesn't erase the effect, but it allows a pause before the bigger ask arrives. The moment you think, "Wait, I only agreed to a pen, not a pickup truck," is the moment you reclaim choice. Small yeses can be powerful tools or clever traps, depending on who's holding the door. Door in the face. Start huge. Get refused. Then concede to your real request. Sometimes the quickest path to a yes is to start with an outrageous no. The door-in-the-face technique works by making an unreasonable first request so extreme that rejection is certain before retreating to a smaller, more reasonable ask. That second request, framed against the giant one, feels like compromise rather than imposition. The brain interprets the shift as generosity and reciprocity, softening resistance. Psychologist Robert Cialdini tested this in the 1970s. Students were first asked to volunteer 2 years mentoring juvenile delinquents, an absurd demand that almost everyone refused. But when the request was scaled back to a single day chaperoning a zoo trip, compliance soared compared to a group who only heard the smaller request. The initial no made the second ask feel like meeting halfway. Marketers and fundraisers use this constantly. A charity might open with a $500 donation request, only to settle for $50. Car dealerships do it too, presenting an overpriced model first, then making a basic version feel like a bargain by comparison. The smaller ask is always the real target, but without the inflated anchor, it wouldn't seem nearly as reasonable. Everyday life is full of subtler versions. A teenager asks for a week-long trip with friends, expecting refusal before bargaining down to a weekend getaway. The goal all along, friends slip it in too, help me move my whole house, followed by, okay, just the couch then. What once felt like a big favor now feels light. The second ask succeeds because it's framed as a concession. The danger lies in how natural this feels. People don't want to seem rigid, so when the other side backs down, they feel compelled to reciprocate. But recognizing the tactic helps. If the first request is clearly inflated, the second may not be as modest as it seems. A smaller ask doesn't automatically deserve a yes, just because it looks tame by comparison. At its core, door-in-the-face works because humans are wired for fairness. When someone retreats, we want to reward the flexibility. Used honestly, it can smooth negotiations and foster compromise. Used manipulatively, it tricks people into agreements they'd otherwise refuse. The key is spotting when that big first ask is less about genuine desire and more about staging the reasonable request that follows. Peak technique. Oddly specific asks 17 cents. Jolt attention. Conversation is automatic for most individuals. A request like, "Can you spare some change?" or "Do you have a minute?" is typically ignored. The brain ignores normal noise and doesn't process it. Add an unexpected twist. "Can you spare 37 cents? Or could I borrow exactly 4.5 minutes of your time?" And autopilot shuts off. The strange specificity intrigues, disrupting routine and increasing compliance rates. The peak strategy works by making the ask seem uncommon, which draws attention. Researchers tried this with panhandlers, begging for change. People often refused their requests for 25 or 50 cents. Compliance increased when they requested 17 cents, which was unusual. The unusual number disrupted regular life, making people wonder why that exact amount. Being curious increases the likelihood of saying yes. The request felt unique, not scripted. Marketers and fundraisers regularly apply this. Instead of a $10 donation, campaigns may request $9.47 to cover one child's school supplies. The curiously accurate amount gives the attraction a real-world cost connection. During holiday sales, online merchants may charge $11.11, only to attract attention. Email subject lines like 5.5 tips to boost your productivity are more likely to be opened than 5 tips, because the half tip intrigues readers. Peak is used in social situations through playful inquiries. Some friends say, "Text me at exactly 11:11 for good luck," or "Can you grab me 19 napkins from the counter?" The specificity makes the request a mini puzzle, odd enough to capture attention, innocuous enough to comply. Sometimes teachers say, "Write 301 words instead of about 300. A strange instruction makes the task more memorable and motivating. Since strange requests sound ludicrous, humor comes naturally. Could you lend me $3.86? Very important. The asker's precision is odd but hard to ignore. Imagine a street performer saying, "Please don't give me $1. Give me 99 cents, because I love odd numbers." While laughing, people dig into their pockets. The peak's humor lessens resistance and maintains attention. The peak approach disrupts scripted relationships psychologically. Most rejections are automated. A strange request forces everyone to rethink the issue. Complying is the quickest approach to resolve the unusual tension once engaged. The request sticks out, therefore individuals generally accept to satisfy their curiosity. Awareness helps twice. First, observing the peculiarity helps people decide if the request is extraordinary or merely odd. Second, it can help pupils focus. Buyers notice a product, or strangers pause in a hectic world. A little quirkiness makes things memorable. The peak approach shows how minor twists can have big effects. Specificity stands out in a sea of generic questions and pitches. An odd number, phrase, or angle doesn't just catch attention, it buys a few seconds of genuine focus, which is often enough to persuade a no. Default effect. Pre-selected options win, because switching feels costly. Humans like to think of themselves as selective decision makers, but most people accept what is given to them. The default effect is the tendency to persist with pre-selected options rather to switch mentally, even when better options available. Not sloth, but efficiency. The brain seeks the easiest path, but that choice can be influenced, and entire enterprises are created on it. Organ donation rates are a prominent example. Countries with 90% donor enrollment, unless residents opt out, have high participation. Countries that require active participation struggle to reach 20%. The difference is bureaucracy, not morality. People choose the pre-checked item to save lives or avoid steps. Default controls national policies without anyone speaking up. Tech and marketing businesses use this approach often. A streaming platform may pre-check auto-renew upon sign-up, assuming most customers won't uncheck it. Because few people navigate menus to adjust, software upgrades install recommended settings by default. Even fast food menus default to fries and soda, so asking for apple slices feels extra. Burger and fries stay. Default wins. Psychologists say defaults work through inertia and tacit endorsement. It's easier to accept the current decision than to actively choose another, so inertia prevents change. Why would the default be the best or recommended option, if not implied? Even independent people find defaults sticky due to these influences. Social life shows smaller, everyday examples. In collaborative initiatives, the first plan given usually wins unless someone strongly objections. Most people nod when a server offers. That comes with fries, rather than try alternatives. Because of defaults, people keep old customs, rituals, and communication styles in relationships. Breaking defaults is hard and expensive. Humor appears here. Consider the person who has paid for a magazine subscription for 3 years since canceling, requires calling during business hours, or the friend who uses the preset ringtone on their phone because changing up settings feels like conquering Everest, or the coworker who puts 2 spaces after a period because that's the default I learned in typing class. Defaults stick, sometimes hilariously. Good can come from using the default effect. Health insurers that default to healthier options encourage better outcomes. Automatic enrollment retirement plans boost savings. Cafeterias that serve fruit as the side dish boost nutrition without denying fries to fries fans. Instead of eliminating choice, defaults set the most common path. Awareness is most important when defaults benefit others. Asking who benefits from this being the default can reveal whether the designer favored you or merely made it convenient. Because defaults can simplify life, but also trap people into unintended expenditures, habits, and obligations. Humans are momentum-driven, and defaults ingeniously harness that. Organ donation phone settings and Coke with a burger are often presented as normal unless someone unchecks the box. Decoy effect. An inferior option makes the target choice look obvious. Picture yourself at a movie theater concession stand. A small popcorn costs $3, a big $7, and a strangely priced medium, $6.50. The huge suddenly seems cheap. No one would pay $6.50 for a medium, when a large tub costs 50 cents more, only to make the enormous feel irresistible. Does that meaningless medium exist? Decoy effect, or asymmetric dominance effect. The inferior choice, meant to be rejected, steers individuals toward the seller's preferred option. In controlled studies using pens and calculators at varied prices, psychologists discovered this. Participants chose more evenly when given two simple options. At a third, inferior option, priced uncomfortably or delivering less value, and preferences swung dramatically toward the target choice. The decoy didn't compete. It accentuated the better option. Marketing loves this impact. Many subscription models use it. A news website may offer $59 digital, $125 print, and $125 digital and print plans. Why is the print-only plan the same price as the combo? Because nobody should choose it. It makes the mix seem like a no-brainer, driving purchasers toward the company's preferred option. Without the decoy, people may pause. With it, the choice seems clear. Fitness centers, restaurants, and electronic stores use the same method. A wine list may have an excessively expensive bottle at the top, making moderate selections seem cheap. A gym may offer a basic plan, an exorbitant middle plan, and a premium plan that seems worth it next to the middle. Even phone providers offer oddly priced plans to lure people into the profit zone. Decoys can appear in everyday social life. Imagine a double date when someone invites a buddy who is comparable in appearance or charm, but less polished, making their favorite friend look better. The principle is used cheekily, if not manipulatively. Having a weaker applicant in the pool makes job candidates look stronger without effort. Decoys highlight, not compete. How apparent the method is makes it funny. Even though everyone knows medium popcorn is a fraud, many buy the large because it's so cheap. When a website provides 3 plans, and one looks ridiculously expensive, users laugh while clicking the one they were pushed toward. The trick works even when we know it, like seeing a magician extract a rabbit from a hat while gasping. The psychology relies on relativity. Humans are good at comparing, but lousy at absolute evaluation. Decoys make targets look wiser and safer. The issue is relative dominance, not absolute value. If this alternative is clearly superior than that one, the brain concludes it is right. Awareness is the remedy, but it doesn't always work. Next time a menu, website, or store shelf offers 3 awkwardly formed options, ask, would this option still look beautiful without the awkward one? If no, the decoy worked. Recognizing it doesn't ruin the popcorn or subscription purchase, but it returns the decision to the rightful owner, not the decoy planter. Opt-out framing. You're in. By default, participation jumps. One of the simplest ways to boost participation in almost anything is to flip the starting point. Instead of asking people to actively opt in, you quietly enroll them and give them the option to opt out. This is opt-out framing, a technique that leverages inertia, laziness, and the social weight of defaults to keep people inside the system. The difference sounds small, one checkbox versus another, but in practice, it transforms behavior at massive scales. Organ donation policies are the classic illustration. In countries where citizens must sign up to be donors, participation lingers in the low percentages. But in countries where everyone is automatically a donor, unless they opt out, participation soars to 90% or higher. People aren't suddenly more altruistic in those places. They're just more likely to accept the default. The opt-out framing makes saying no feel like extra effort, so most people stick with yes without thinking much about it. Marketers and subscription services love this framing. A free trial that automatically renews, unless canceled, is just opt-out framing in disguise. The company doesn't rely on enthusiasm for the product alone. It relies on people forgetting or not bothering to opt out. Even email lists take advantage. Sign up for a purchase, and suddenly you're subscribed to updates. Unless you hunt for the tiny opt-out box, buried under layers of text. Participation jumps not because customers eagerly signed up, but because they didn't take the extra step to get out. Workplaces apply it in subtler ways. A company might announce, "Everyone is enrolled in the wellness program. We'll notify you if you'd like to decline." Suddenly, what might have drawn lukewarm interest becomes the norm, because declining takes initiative. Schools do it with permission slips, sending a note that says, "Your child will participate unless you let us know otherwise." Even group activities lean on this framing. A friend organizing a dinner might say, "I've booked for all of us. Tell me if you can't make it." Silence becomes acceptance, and attendance spikes. The psychology driving opt-out framing is the combination of status quo bias and loss aversion. People tend to stick with whatever is already true, and opting out feels like giving something up. If the default says you're a member, unsubscribing feels like a loss, even if you never wanted to join. It's easier to do nothing than to actively withdraw. Humor finds its way here too. Everyone has a story about signing up for a free trial of some obscure channel, say World's Best Lawn Care Network, only to realize months later they've been billed all along, or discovering they're still members of a club they forgot existed. Even gym memberships work this way. It's easier to keep paying than to endure the awkwardness of canceling in person. People laugh at the absurdity, but the money keeps dripping out of their accounts. Opt-out framing isn't inherently shady. Sometimes it's used to promote beneficial behaviors. Automatic retirement savings plans, for example, help people build wealth who otherwise might procrastinate forever. Auto-enrolling workers makes participation the default, nudging them toward long-term gains. The trick is whether the default serves the individual or just the institution. Awareness, as always, puts the power back in the chooser's hands. Pausing to ask, "Am I really choosing this, or just failing to unchoose it?" helps separate genuine participation from passive acceptance. Opt-out framing proves that sometimes the most powerful persuasion tactic isn't a flashy pitch or an emotional plea. It's the quiet rearranging of the default. Status quo bias. Sticking with the current state feels safer than change. When faced with choices, people often cling to whatever they already have, even when better alternatives are available. This stickiness is called status quo bias, and it reveals a deep preference for the familiar. Change, no matter how logical or beneficial, introduces uncertainty. The present situation, however flawed, feels like safer ground. It's not always about rational cost, benefit. It's about comfort, predictability, and the brain's natural tendency to treat the known as less risky than the unknown. Researchers have demonstrated this effect in countless contexts. In classic experiments, participants given a mug were less likely to trade it for an equally valued pen than participants who started with the pen. The object itself wasn't special, but once it became the current state, people clung to it. Similarly, in investment studies, participants overwhelmingly stuck with default funds rather than switching to potentially more profitable ones. The act of changing felt heavier than staying put, even when logic said otherwise. In everyday life, status quo bias is everywhere. Employees stay in unsatisfying jobs longer than they'd like, because the routine feels safer than risking a leap into something new. Couples stay in stagnant relationships, because leaving disrupts the familiar rhythm, even if happiness lies elsewhere. Consumers keep outdated phone plans or insurance packages simply because switching requires effort and risk. The present may not be ideal, but at least it's known territory. Marketers and companies exploit this tendency. That's why so many services auto-renew. People let subscriptions roll on, not because they truly want them, but because canceling requires action, and change feels uncomfortable. Banks and utility companies know that customers rarely switch providers, even when competitors offer better deals. The inertia of the status quo protects businesses more effectively than loyalty ever could. Social and political systems also reflect this bias. Policies, once established, become difficult to reverse, even if they're inefficient. Voters often resist reforms because the existing system, however flawed, feels less risky than alternatives. This bias explains why institutions move slowly. Change requires overcoming not only logical objections, but also psychological resistance to leaving the familiar behind. Humor creeps in when people defend the status quo for absurd reasons. Think of relatives who refuse to replace a decades-old sofa because it's fine the way it is, even though the springs squeak like a haunted house. Or coworkers who insist on using outdated software because that's how we've always done it. The comfort of familiarity turns quirks into sacred traditions, even when everyone secretly knows better. The psychology behind status quo bias is linked to loss aversion. Change often highlights what might be lost more than what might be gained. Switching jobs risks losing steady pay. Switching phone carriers risks losing coverage. Gains may be real, but they're abstract, while potential losses feel concrete and painful. The mind exaggerates the danger of moving away from the current state, keeping people anchored in place. Awareness helps, but it's not easy to fight. Overcoming status quo bias requires deliberately evaluating options as if starting fresh. Instead of asking, "Should I switch?" the better question is, "If I had to choose today, which option would I pick?" This reframing strips away inertia and makes the decision about actual preference rather than habit. In the end, status quo bias isn't always harmful. It can save energy by avoiding constant reevaluation. But unchecked, it keeps people tied to choices long past their usefulness. Recognizing when the way things are is just a cushion for fear can be the first step toward a healthier, smarter change. Because sometimes, the only thing keeping the old sofa in the living room is the simple fact that it was already there. Illusory truth. Repetition alone makes claims feel truer. Say something once, and people might shrug. Say it again, and they nod politely. Say it a dozen times, and eventually, it starts sounding like fact, whether or not there's a shred of evidence behind it. This is the illusory truth effect. The tendency for repeated statements to feel more believable simply because they're familiar. Truth, in this case, is less about accuracy and more about echo. Psychologists first documented this in the 1970s. Participants were asked to rate the truthfulness of a series of statements. Some were true, others false, and some repeated multiple times across different sessions. The results were clear. The repeated statements, even the false ones, were judged as more likely to be true. The brain wasn't carefully weighing evidence. It was leaning on fluency. Familiar information feels easier to process, and that ease gets mistaken for truth. The effect helps explain why advertising jingles and slogans burrow so deeply into memory. Melts in your mouth, not in your hand, or have it your way, aren't powerful because they're profound. They're powerful because they're repeated, until the words sound synonymous with the product. Politicians use the same principle, hammering talking points over and over. The repetition isn't just for emphasis. It's to turn statements into a kind of background truth, absorbed through sheer familiarity. Social media has amplified illusory truth to dizzying levels. A meme or headline repeated across feeds gains traction, regardless of its accuracy. Even when corrections appear, the repetition of the false claim lingers. People recall the message more easily than the rebuttal, and the familiarity bias makes it feel true. This is why misinformation spreads so effectively online. Speed and volume of repetition matter more than evidence. Everyday life offers smaller examples. Someone who insists repeatedly, "I'm terrible with directions," eventually convinces both themselves and their friends, even if it started as a half joke. A coworker who constantly repeats, "This project is impossible," plants doubt in the group, even if the task is entirely doable. Repetition shapes, not just beliefs about the outside world, but self-concepts and group dynamics. Humor sneaks in with how absurd this can get. Parents warn their kids, if you keep making that face, it'll stick that way. And after hearing it 100 times, the kids start to half believe it. Or friends repeat an inside joke so often that it morphs into fact within their group. Even though it's nonsense to outsiders, the sheer act of hearing something enough times transforms silliness into pseudo-truth. The psychological mechanism is about processing fluency. Familiar information requires less cognitive effort, so the brain interprets that ease as a sign of accuracy. The content itself doesn't change, but the repeated exposure lubricates acceptance. It's a shortcut that usually works well. After all, repeated facts are often true, but it leaves people open to manipulation when falsehoods are repeated with confidence. Awareness is the best counter. When something feels true simply because it's familiar, it's worth pausing to ask, do I believe this because it's accurate, or because I've heard it a dozen times? Cross-checking with evidence can cut through the echo. Otherwise, the danger is mistaking repetition for reality, letting volume drown out validity. At its heart, the illusory truth effect reveals that human minds aren't strict lie detectors. They're more like echo chambers, equating familiarity with truth. And in a noisy world where slogans, headlines, and memes repeat endlessly, remembering that I've heard this before isn't the same as it's true can make all the difference. Peak end rule: we judge by the high point and the ending, not the average. Human memory isn't a careful accountant tallying every moment. Instead, it works like a highlight reel editor. It grabs the most intense part of an experience, the peak and the way it ended, then compresses the whole event into those snapshots. This is the peak end rule. The reason people misremember long, painful experiences as tolerable if they ended gently, or why a vacation filled with hiccups is recalled fondly if it closed on a high note. The brain isn't fair, it's selective, and it cares more about peaks and endings than averages. Psychologist Daniel Kahneman and his colleagues famously demonstrated this by studying patients undergoing uncomfortable medical procedures. Some endured shorter but sharper versions, others longer procedures with pain that gradually eased near the end. When asked afterward, patients rated the longer procedure as less unpleasant overall, simply because it ended better, even though they had objectively suffered longer. Their memories were shaped less by total pain and more by the final trajectory. Marketers, entertainers, and event planners lean on this principle constantly. Theme parks know to end rides with a big splash or sudden drop. Concerts save the fan-favorite songs for the finale. Restaurants often serve complimentary mints or desserts at the end of meals, ensuring the experience closes sweetly. Even customer service departments are trained to resolve complaints with warmth and efficiency, because people remember the ending of the interaction more than the rocky beginning. Vacations and social gatherings follow the same pattern. A family trip may have been filled with flight delays, mosquito bites, and arguments over directions. But if the last day is spent on a beautiful beach with everyone laughing, that's the memory that dominates. A dinner party, with an awkward start, can be redeemed by a joyful finale, the clinking of glasses and laughter sticking more than the earlier silence. Humans rewrite experiences retroactively, editing them with bold markers at the peak and the close. Everyday life provides countless smaller examples. A movie with a mediocre first half, but a thrilling climax, often earns rave reviews, while one that starts strong but fizzles at the end is remembered poorly. A long meeting that drags but ends with a funny joke leaves participants chuckling instead of groaning. Even relationships sometimes get painted by the peak end rule. People may describe an entire era as amazing or terrible, based largely on one euphoric stretch or a bitter ending. Humor slips into this bias too. People will insist a roller coaster was the best ever, even though they spent half of it screaming in terror, because the thrilling drop was the peak and the final glide left them laughing. Or someone might rave about a restaurant because of the free cookie at the end, forgetting that the appetizer was soggy. The highlight reel edits out the dull or difficult parts, and the memory becomes kinder than the lived reality. The psychology here hinges on memory construction. Experiences fade quickly, but the peaks and conclusions get stored as shorthand. This isn't necessarily irrational. It saves mental space, but it also means decisions about the future can be skewed. Someone may agree to repeat a grueling event simply because the ending felt good. A runner who recalls the euphoria of crossing a finish line may sign up for another marathon, forgetting the blisters and cramps along the way. Awareness of the peak end rule gives power to shape experiences deliberately. Ending a project on a celebratory note or wrapping a tough day with a relaxing ritual creates stronger positive memories. Conversely, knowing the rule warns us not to be tricked into repeating unpleasant experiences just because they ended well. Ultimately, memory is less about arithmetic and more about storytelling. The peak provides drama, the ending provides closure, and the rest dissolves into background noise. That's why life's events often feel better or worse in hindsight than they did in the moment. The brain edits the reel and the highlight reel is what remains. Primacy effect. First impressions anchor later interpretation. The first slice of information often has more influence than anything that follows. This is the primacy effect. The tendency for initial impressions to stick and color the way we interpret everything else. Once that first frame is in place, later details get filtered through it, often bent to match the opening judgment. The brain loves shortcuts, and the first impression is the shortcut that shapes the story. Psychologist Solomon Asch and others demonstrated this in the mid-20th century with studies on impression formation. Participants were asked to evaluate someone described with a string of adjectives. When the word warm came first, followed by less flattering traits, people rated the person favorably. When cold led the list, later positive traits couldn't fully rescue the impression. The sequence mattered. The first word set the tone, and the rest fell into line. Everyday life runs on this principle. Job interviews hinge on the opening minutes. Whether it's a confident handshake, eye contact, or stumbling over a chair, first impressions prime the interviewer, who may unconsciously interpret later answers in light of that opening moment. Dating works similarly. Someone charming in the first few minutes gets more benefit of the doubt afterward, while an awkward start lingers even if the conversation improves. Teachers often note that students who shine early in class discussions are seen as smart, with later mistakes written off as exceptions. Marketers leverage primacy whenever possible. That's why packaging and branding are so meticulously designed. The first glance at a sleek box primes consumers to believe the product inside is high quality. Political campaigns carefully script first debates and opening ads, knowing those impressions will echo through the rest of the election season. Even in online shopping, the first review a customer reads, glowing or scathing, can anchor perception, shaping how subsequent reviews are interpreted. Social interactions prove how stubborn primacy can be. Think about meeting someone who seems aloof at first, but later warms up. The early impression lingers, leaving you to describe them as hard to get to know. Conversely, someone friendly at the start, but distant later often gets excused. They must have just been tired. The primacy effect sticks like glue, making the beginning disproportionately powerful. Humor sneaks in with how unforgiving this bias can be. Spill coffee on yourself in the first 5 minutes of a meeting, and that becomes the story, no matter how eloquent your presentation is afterward. Or mispronounce a word during an introduction, and suddenly you're the person who said, especially. Meanwhile, dazzling people at the start can make later slip-ups invisible, like the friend who tells a great joke upon arrival and coasts on that charm for the rest of the evening. The psychology here ties back to cognitive efficiency. Processing new information takes energy, so the brain prefers to form a quick impression early and then filter later data through it. Once the story is set, the brain resists rewriting it, even when evidence suggests otherwise. This mechanism helps save effort, but can lock people into misjudgments. Awareness of the primacy effect makes it clear why first impressions deserve care, but also why it's important not to overvalue them. A bad start doesn't necessarily define someone, just as a polished opening doesn't guarantee substance. The trick is to ask, if I'd learned this information in a different order, would my conclusion be the same? That question helps loosen the grip of the opening act. In the end, primacy reveals how beginnings frame the story. The first brush stroke on the canvas sets the tone, and everything else is interpreted against it. People remember the start, filter the middle, and forgive or condemn based on that initial anchor. Which is why, whether it's a meeting, a product, or a first date, the opening moments so often outweigh the rest of the show. Recency effect. The latest thing heard weighs heavy on recall. If the primacy effect shows how beginnings anchor judgment, the recency effect proves that endings often hog the spotlight in memory. The recency effect is the tendency to remember the most recent information more clearly than earlier details. It's why someone can recall the last item on a grocery list, but forget the first three. Or why a closing argument in a trial often shapes the jury more than the opening. The brain doesn't capture everything evenly. It shines a spotlight on the last thing seen or heard. Psychologists discovered this pattern through simple memory experiments. When participants were shown lists of words and later asked to recall them, items at the beginning, primacy and end recency of the list were remembered best, while the middle suffered. This serial position effect revealed that the last item stayed fresh in short-term memory, giving them an advantage over earlier information that faded faster. Everyday life demonstrates this bias constantly. In presentations, audiences are more likely to remember the final slide or punchline than the earlier bulk of information. In conversations, people walk away recalling the last sentence or joke more vividly than the middle chatter. Even in customer service, the way an interaction ends, kind or curt, lingers longer than how it began. Endings create lasting impressions, not because they're objectively more important, but because they're closer in time when memory takes its snapshot. Marketers exploit this by carefully designing the close of an experience. That's why product pitches often end with a bold summary, why commercials finish with catchy slogans, and why phone operators close calls with scripted phrases like "thank you for being a valued customer." The recency effect ensures that whatever comes last carries disproportionate weight, sometimes redeeming an otherwise shaky encounter. Politics and public speaking rely on it heavily. A candidate may stumble during a debate, but if they close with a strong, emotionally resonant line, the ending lingers in voters' minds. Teachers know that students remember the final minutes of class more clearly than the middle lecture. Comedians structure sets with this in mind too. Saving their best jokes for the end ensures the audience leaves laughing, even if the opener was rocky. Humor often pops up in how this effect warps memory. People might describe a mediocre movie as great because the ending was satisfying, forgetting the 2 hours of filler that came before. Or they'll call a restaurant terrible because the dessert was disappointing, conveniently ignoring the excellent appetizer. The last bite, or last scene, becomes the shorthand for the entire experience. Whether it deserves it or not, the recency effect can also shape relationships. A pleasant conversation that ends in an awkward remark can overshadow all the warmth that came before. Conversely, a rocky interaction, smoothed over by a kind goodbye, often leaves people recalling it fondly. The final notes play louder than the rest of the song. Psychologically, this happens because the latest information is still sitting in working memory, unburdened by the decay that eats away at earlier details. Unless deliberately rehearsed or written down, the first half of information fades, while the last half clings. Over time, both may erode, but in the short term, recency dominates. Awareness of the effect helps in two ways. First, it reminds us to put care into how we end things, presentations, meetings, conversations, because those final moments often define the memory. Second, it encourages caution when judging experiences too heavily by their ending. Was the entire event great? Or did it just close well? Was it truly awful? Or did the bad finale poison the recollection? Asking these questions balances out memory's bias. In the end, the recency effect proves that human memory isn't fair. It's a stage spotlight that favors whatever is still on stage. What comes last may not always be best, but it tends to be what we carry out the door. Public pledge. Saying it out loud boosts follow-through and adherence. There's a peculiar weight to words once they're spoken aloud. A private promise can be shrugged off, but a public pledge carries an invisible audience. The goal doesn't change, yet declaring it turns it into part of one's reputation. This is the power of public pledges. Intentions voiced in front of others are far more likely to be honored, not because the task is easier, but because backing out threatens identity and face. Psychologists have long noted that people crave consistency between words and actions, especially when others are watching. Tell your friends you're training for a marathon, and even on mornings you'd rather sleep in. The thought of explaining failure drags you into your running shoes. The treadmill hasn't softened, but the imagined embarrassment of quitting becomes a motivator. Politics relies on this principle. Campaigns ask supporters not just to vote, but to display signs, stickers, or public declarations online. Research shows those who make such pledges are more likely to follow through. A private intention is fragile. A public one cements behavior by tying it to identity. I am the kind of person who does this. Everyday life is full of quieter versions. Students who say aloud they'll finish an assignment early tend to deliver. Friends who promise to arrive at 7 hustle harder to be on time. Couples making wedding vows in front of family and friends embed their promises into community, making them harder to abandon without social cost. Businesses use the same psychology. Fitness apps encourage users to share progress publicly, turning goals into social commitments. Crowdfunding platforms display names and donation amounts, making it awkward to back out. Visibility transforms pledges into social contracts. Of course, public promises can backfire. Someone swears on New Year's Eve they'll quit sugar, only to hide in the pantry with a donut. Weeks later, a coworker who boldly claims they'll crush a presentation may end up glued to cue cards. Public pledges don't guarantee success, but they guarantee pressure. The mechanism isn't about morality. It's about identity. Public commitments convert abstract goals into self-statements. I'm reliable. I keep my word. Breaking them doesn't just betray the task. It dents the self-image. That social mirror makes the effect sticky. Harnessed deliberately, public pledges can be powerful motivators. Sharing goals or posting updates increases accountability. But making promises too casually can create obligations made for appearances rather than genuine intent. The trick is choosing when to speak and when silence is stronger, because once spoken, even a casual "I'll be there" echoes louder than expected. Labeling. You're the kind who helps, nudges people to match the label. Sometimes the fastest way to change someone's behavior isn't through rules, bribes, or lectures. It's by giving them a label and letting them live up to it. Once an identity is attached, even casually, people feel pressure to act consistently with it. Call someone a helpful person, and the next time a favor is asked, they're more likely to agree. The label becomes a subtle badge, and no one wants to contradict their own badge. Psychology experiments illustrate this vividly. In one study, researchers told adults they were likely to vote because they seemed like responsible citizens. Turnout among this group rose significantly compared to those who weren't given the label. The compliment didn't change core values. It simply nudged people to see themselves differently, and behavior followed. Marketers use the same trick. A charity might say, "Our donors are generous people like you," planting the idea of generosity as part of the person's identity. Loyalty programs call customers valued members, making continued purchases feel like role fulfillment. Even lines like "You're the kind of smart shopper who knows a deal" slip flattering labels onto buyers, encouraging them to act accordingly. In daily life, labeling happens almost without thought. Teachers who call students bright may find them working harder to prove it. Students labeled troublemakers often live down to that title. Parents who describe children as helpful or creative often see more helping and creativity, not because the label transforms them instantly, but because kids want to match the identity. The danger, of course, is when negative labels do the same. turning lazy or clumsy into self-fulfilling prophecies. Humor sneaks in when labels snowball into obligations. The coworker praised as the snack person, after bringing cookies once, is suddenly expected to provide treats at every office party. The friend labeled the planner somehow ends up organizing every trip. Flattery becomes responsibility. But consistency makes people lean into it, even while grumbling. What makes labeling powerful is its tie to self-concept. Humans don't just act on impulse. They act to preserve the stories they tell about themselves. Once someone believes they're kind, responsible, or loyal, their choices bend to fit that narrative. Even when the label comes from outside, the pressure to align feels internal and real. Awareness makes labeling a tool rather than a trap. Choosing positive labels, both for others and for ourselves, can spark growth. Calling a friend dependable may encourage reliability. Calling yourself a runner can make lacing up shoes easier. But recognizing manipulative labels matters too. If a salesperson insists, "You're the type who invests in quality," it's worth asking whether that's affirmation or a leash. In the end, labeling is less about accuracy than influence. It plants seeds of identity that people water with action. Nobody is defined by a single phrase, but words echo, and often all it takes to turn a fleeting behavior into a steady pattern is hearing, "That's just the kind of person you are." Left digit bias, $3.99, reads as $3 something, not 4. It's a quirk so simple, it almost feels like a math error. Yet it's baked into daily life. The brain pays disproportionate attention to the leftmost digit of a number. This is left digit bias. The reason $3.99 doesn't feel like $4, even though the difference is a lonely penny. The left digit frames the entire perception, making the number belong to a lower category in people's minds. To the brain, $3.99 isn't almost 4. It's 3 and change. Retailers have relied on this for decades. Grocery store shelves are stacked with $1.99 soups, $2.99 cereals, $9.99 frozen pizzas. Not because anyone believes they're saving a fortune, but because the leading digit tells the story. That penny less transforms a $10 item into a single-digit one. Clothing stores do the same. $49.99 feels dramatically cheaper than $50, though no one could honestly claim that the penny left over will change their budget. Research supports how deep this bias runs. Studies show that consumers consistently perceive $2.99 as closer to $2 than to $3. Neurological tests even suggest the brain processes these numbers categorically rather than linearly. Once the digit shifts from 2 to 3, or 3 to 4, it feels like a big jump, regardless of the tiny difference at the decimal's edge. That's why gas stations cling to prices like $4.89 circumflex, 9, squeezing every drop out of the illusion. Drivers groan, yet the fraction of a cent display keeps tanks filling. The bias doesn't stop at shopping. Car odometers are another playground. A car with 79,999 miles feels under 80,000, but the instant it tips over, its value drops in people's minds, even though the difference is 1 mile. The same happens with birthdays. Turning 30 feels like a seismic shift from the 20s, even though the day before was just 29, plus 364 days. The left digit rewrites identity, not just price tags. Humor sneaks in when people knowingly play along. Parents insist the toy was only $9, when in reality it was $9.99. Friends brag about grabbing lunch for under 10, even though tax and tip pushed it well past 12, and bargain hunters smile smugly at their $999 laptop. Never mind that it was essentially $1,000. The penny saved isn't buying anything else. It's buying the warm illusion of thrift. Marketers combine left digit bias with other tricks for maximum effect. Pair it with charm pricing, and suddenly, $19.99 looks like it belongs to the teens rather than the 20s. Layer in a decoy, and $49.99 looks modest next to $79.99. The first digit carries so much weight that the rest of the number might as well be whispering. Awareness doesn't erase the bias, but it helps sharpen perspective. When confronted with a $3.99 price tag, rounding up mentally restores honesty. It's $4, full stop. When staring at odometer readings or age milestones, remembering that 1 mile or 1 day doesn't fundamentally alter reality can soften the arbitrary drama. The left digit may shout the loudest, but it doesn't tell the whole story. At its core, left digit bias reveals just how categorical human thinking can be. People don't see numbers as seamless continuums. They see thresholds. Crossing from 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 feels like a leap, no matter how small the decimal gap. It's a tiny trick of perception, but one that fuels entire industries and empties wallets a penny at a time. Partitioned pricing. Splitting fees hides the painful total. When a price is broken into smaller chunks, rather than shown as one blunt figure, it feels less painful, even if the sum is exactly the same. This is partitioned pricing, the practice of slicing the cost into pieces so that each fragment looks manageable, while the total quietly swells in the background. Humans are more comfortable digesting multiple small bites than swallowing one big number whole, even though the meal is identical. E-commerce has turned partitioned pricing into an art form. An airline ticket might start at $199, a tempting figure until the add-ons start rolling in. $25 for a checked bag, $15 for a seat with legroom, $10 for priority boarding, maybe even $5 for water if you're flying on a budget carrier. By the time the traveler checks out, the ticket costs closer to $300, but because the price was revealed piece by piece, the shock is softened. Each little charge seems tolerable, and by the time the full tally emerges, the buyer is too invested to back out. Researchers have shown that this works because people tend to evaluate each partition separately, focusing more on the individual amounts than the sum. The shipping fee of $4.99 feels minor compared to the product price of $19.99, even though the final bill is essentially $25. If the seller had listed it as $25 up front, shoppers might balk. By splitting it, they minimize the sticker shock. Hotels do this with resort fees. The nightly rate looks affordable, but taxes and amenities quietly inflate the real price. Guests grumble at checkout, but by then the credit card is already swiped. Subscription services use partitioned pricing in subtler ways. A gym might advertise $1 a day instead of $365 a year. Streaming platforms boast just $7.99 a month, rather than admitting it's nearly $100 annually. Framing a cost in partitions disguises the bigger picture, tricking the brain into treating it as smaller than it is. Even installment plans thrive on this. Only $20 a month for a $1,200 sofa feels easier than admitting you're committing over $1,000. Everyday life mirrors the principle too. Friends planning a vacation often justify costs by breaking them down. It's only $50 a night if we split it, conveniently forgetting flights, food, and transport. Or a coworker might pitch an office fundraiser as just a few dollars from everyone, softening the reality that the total ask is much larger. Partition pricing works because it reframes the narrative. Instead of one big painful number, it's a series of small, seemingly harmless ones. Humor creeps in with how absurd this can look. Gas stations proudly advertise fuel at $3.99 and 0.9 cents per gallon, as if the tiny fractional partition changes anything. Or consider the restaurant bill, where the entree seems reasonable until sides, drinks, dessert, and service fees balloon the total. Diners joke about having spent only $12 on the main course, while the final charge looks more like $40. Everyone knows they've been partitioned, but the laugh comes only after the wallet is lighter. Awareness is the best shield. Asking, "What's the total cost?" all in, forces the brain to zoom out from the partitions to the sum. Once the total is clear, it's easier to decide whether the purchase is truly worth it. Partitioned pricing isn't inherently malicious. Sometimes it genuinely helps people budget or understand components of a service. But when used as camouflage, it nudges people into commitments they might resist if the full cost were revealed up front. In the end, partitioned pricing works because humans prefer comfort over confrontation. Small slices are easier to swallow than a whole pie, even if it means eating more pie than intended.